Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Tonight's story is one of the most dramatic military and political turning points of the modern conflict era. What happened in Crimea was not just another battlefield update. It was a shockwave that traveled from the Black Sea to the halls of power in Moscow, Kiev, Washington, Ankara, and beyond. For years, Crimea was described as an impenetrable fortress, a heavily fortified symbol of control, pride, and strategic dominance. Analysts called it untouchable, generals called it secure, propagandists called it permanent, and yet the defenses collapsed, not overnight, not by accident, and not because of a single strike. The breakthrough in Crimea was the result of months, even years, of pressure, planning, deception, and exploitation of weaknesses that many believed did not exist. Tonight, we're going to break down how this happened, step by step, layer by layer, and why this moment may redefine the future of the entire conflict. To understand how Crimea's defenses collapsed, we must first understand why Crimea mattered so much. Crimea is not just a piece of land. It is the keystone of control in the Black Sea. From its ports, airfields, radar stations, and missile batteries, whoever controls Crimea can project power deep into Eastern Europe, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. It serves as a launchpad for air operations, naval dominance, and logistical supply routes. Losing Crimea is not just losing territory, it is losing strategic depth, prestige, and a critical shield. For years, Russia invested heavily in turning Crimea into what many called a steel porcupine. Layers of air defenses, coastal missile systems, electronic warfare units, fortified trenches, concrete bunkers, minefields, and naval patrols were all designed to make any attack unimaginably costly. On paper, Crimea was one of the most defended regions in Europe, but war is not fought on paper. The first cracks in Crimea's defenses appeared long before the breakthrough itself. They appeared in logistics. Every modern army lives and dies by its supply lines, and Crimea's greatest vulnerability has always been geography. The peninsula is connected to the mainland primarily through narrow corridors and bridges. For years, the Kerch Bridge stood as both a logistical artery and a psychological symbol. It was not just concrete and steel, it was a statement of permanence. Once that statement was challenged, everything began to change. Repeated strikes on supply depots, fuel storage sites, rail junctions, and command centers forced defenders to stretch their resources. Ammunition had to be rationed. Air defense systems were redeployed constantly, trying to cover too many targets at once. Maintenance cycles were disrupted, crews were exhausted, equipment aged faster than it could be repaired. At the same time, something equally dangerous was happening: complacency. For a long period, Crimea experienced relative calm compared to front-line regions. This created a false sense of security. Units rotated in expecting rear area duty, not constant high intensity threat. Training suffered. Alert levels fluctuated. When warning signs appeared, they were often dismissed as harassment rather than preparation for something larger. Meanwhile, the attackers were watching, studying, mapping every radar frequency, response time, patrol route, and reaction pattern. The next phase was deception. One of the most underestimated aspects of the Crimea breakthrough was the use of strategic misdirection. While attention was focused elsewhere, while headlines emphasized other fronts, pressure quietly built around Crimea. Drone probes tested defenses. Small-scale strikes forced air defense systems to reveal their positions. Naval movements were observed. Communication patterns were intercepted. Every response told a story. Over time, a detailed picture emerged of where defenses were strongest and where they were thin. More importantly, it revealed how defenders reacted under stress. Which systems responded first, which units hesitated, which commands required higher authorization to act. This intelligence advantage was decisive. Then came the erosion of air superiority. Crimea's defense relied heavily on layered air defense systems. On paper, they formed an overlapping shield. In reality, they depended on coordination, radar coverage, and uninterrupted command links. Precision strikes targeted not just launchers, but radars, power supplies, and communication nodes. Even when systems were not destroyed, they were blinded or isolated. Electronic warfare played a critical role here. Jamming disrupted signals, false targets flooded screens. Operators were forced to make split-second decisions with incomplete information. Every mistake widened the gap. As air defenses weakened, the sky became more contested. Drones, once seen as minor threats, became central players. They scouted, struck, and distracted. Some were sacrificial, designed to trigger defenses and reveal positions. Others carried precision payloads, hitting high-value targets with terrifying accuracy. The cost exchange favored the attackers. Expensive systems were forced to respond to cheap threats, draining resources and morale. On the ground, defensive lines faced a different kind of pressure. Crimea's fortifications were extensive, but static. Trenches and bunkers are powerful only when supported by mobile reserves and reliable communication. As strikes degraded command centers, coordination suffered. Units became isolated. Orders were delayed or contradictory. In some areas, soldiers fought bravely but blindly, unaware of the broader situation. Psychological pressure mounted. Constant alerts, night attacks, and uncertainty eroded morale. The sense of being untouchable vanished. Rumors spread faster than official information. Every explosion felt closer. Every silence felt ominous. In modern warfare, fear is a weapon, and it was wielded effectively. The naval dimension added another layer of complexity. The Black Sea Fleet, once a symbol of dominance, found itself increasingly constrained. Ports became dangerous. Vessels were forced to relocate or remain at sea. Mines, drones, and missile threats limited freedom of movement. Naval air defense assets were stretched thin, trying to protect ships, ports, and coastal infrastructure simultaneously. As naval pressure increased, supply by sea became riskier. Every resupply run carried the threat of loss. This further strained logistics, reinforcing the cycle of shortage and vulnerability. Then came the moment when pressure turned into momentum. The breakthrough did not look like a single dramatic charge. It looked like a series of cascading failures. A radar knocked out here, a command post disabled there, a supply convoy destroyed, a bridge damaged. Each event alone was manageable. Together, they were catastrophic. Defensive units began to pull back to protect themselves, creating gaps. These gaps forced neighboring units to stretch their lines, making them vulnerable as well. Reserves were committed piecemeal, losing their ability to counterattack decisively. At this stage, the defenders faced an impossible choice: hold every position and risk encirclement, or withdraw to preserve forces and concede ground. Either option carried heavy consequences. The collapse was not a rout, but it was unmistakable. As key nodes fell or were abandoned, the defensive system lost coherence. Orders became reactive rather than proactive. Initiative shifted entirely to the attackers. What was once a fortress became a patchwork of isolated strongpoints. International reaction was immediate. Allies and adversaries alike recognized the significance of what was happening. Markets reacted. Diplomatic channels lit up. Military planners around the world took notes. If Crimea could be breached, then assumptions about fortified territories everywhere needed revision. For Russia, the implications were profound. Crimea had been presented as irreversible, non-negotiable, and secure. Its vulnerability challenged not only military credibility, but political narratives as well. For Ukraine, the breakthrough represented validation of long-term strategy, patience, and adaptation under extreme pressure. But this story is not just about two countries. It is about the future of warfare. Crimea demonstrated that layered defenses, no matter how expensive or sophisticated, are vulnerable to persistent adaptive pressure. It showed that control of information, intelligence, and morale can be as decisive as tanks and missiles. It highlighted the power of drones, electronic warfare, and precision strikes in dismantling systems designed for older forms of conflict. It also underscored the importance of logistics. Armies do not collapse only when soldiers are defeated. They collapse when fuel runs out, ammunition dwindles, and repair crews cannot keep up. Crimea's defenses did not fail because they were weak. They failed because they were overextended, isolated, and slowly suffocated. As the situation continues to evolve, one thing is clear: the breakthrough in Crimea will be studied for decades. Military academies will analyze it. Politicians will argue over it. Historians will debate when the collapse truly began. Was it the first strike on a bridge, the first drone over a radar site, the first commander who realized the fortress was no longer secure? Perhaps it began much earlier, the moment confidence replaced caution. What comes next remains uncertain. Defenses can be rebuilt. Lines can be stabilized. Wars rarely end with a single breakthrough. But the psychological and strategic impact of Crimea's collapse cannot be undone. The myth of invulnerability is gone, and once a myth is shattered, everything changes. If you found this analysis insightful, make sure to stay with us as we continue to break down the most critical moments shaping the world today. Because in modern conflict, the real story is not just what explodes on the battlefield, but what collapses in the mind. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.